Hello, I'm joined here with Charles Carroll, a freelance voice artist, broadcaster and journalist who lives in Southgate. So, firstly, how did you get into this career?
I started out when I was about 20. I'd just finished university and I decided that I wanted to be a journalist, a radio journalist. I did a year-long course in Cornwall, a broadcast journalism course. And after that, I got into local radio, BBC local radio. And I worked for a couple of different local radio stations. I went on to the British Forces Broadcasting Service. I was there during the first Gulf War in the 1990s, which seems a very long time ago now. And then I started doing things for the World Service and Radio 2, and finally I fetched up at Radio 4. There's no great pattern to it. It's just the way it worked out.
Okay, and what would you say an average day is like for you, and what's your most enjoyable part during the day?
An average day is, well, each day is slightly different. Because I'm freelance, I'm not employed by the BBC, and therefore I don't have to go in there every day. So they will book me in advance, and they'll ask me to come in and read the news or do a continuity shift. So I might perhaps... well, I'll tell you what, let me talk about tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm doing two separate jobs. First thing in the morning, I am going to be working for The Economist newspaper or magazine. They have an audio edition, and every Thursday a group of voice artists get together in a studio in Old Street. We sit down and we read The Economist from cover to cover, verbatim. And that takes most of the day, so we do that in shifts. And tomorrow I will be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. I will do that until about 12. And then in the afternoon I'll go over to Radio 4. And I am doing their close-down shift, which means that I will be there from about 4:30 until 1 o'clock the following morning, and I will be the last voice on Radio 4 that night. I'm the one who basically puts it to bed. So that's tomorrow. Not a typical day, but it is tomorrow.
Okay, and what major, if you've broken any, what major news stories have you broken?
Broken suggests that I've gone out there and got a scoop myself, and I have to confess that I do tend to sort of sit on the shoulders of giants. There are a lot of very good journalists, and my main role these days, albeit that I used to work as a reporter, my main role now is to present other people's work, which means that I don't actually break stories, but on the other hand, the big story of the day, I could very easily be doing it. I wish off the top of my head I could think of the biggest story I've ever introduced. I can't. What tends to come to mind is the stories that I missed. The biggest of which would be 9/11. When I was working at the World Service that morning, my shift finished round about 12:30, so lunchtime. I got on the tube, went home, switched on the radio, and the world had changed. And if there are any journalists listening to this, you'll know what I mean when I say I missed it. I don't mean it in a nasty way. I mean, obviously we would all prefer that it hadn't happened, but professionally I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right, well.
I missed the Queen Mother's death, and every announcer does not want to be around for a major royal death.
Well, okay. And has your voice ever been recognised in public? Say, if you're going to the shop and you buy something, has it ever been recognised?
Strangely enough, no.
Okay.
You would be surprised. There are people who listen a great deal to different radio stations, and they will know who you are in that context. But I don't think I have ever been recognised away from
Fair
it.
enough.
It's the joy of radio. If you're on television, everybody knows what you look like. They immediately recognise your face, but not on radio, which is nice because it means I can get on the tube and go home, even if I've been speaking to millions of people a few minutes earlier.
Okay, and if you weren't a broadcaster, what would you want to be?
That's a very difficult question because I've always wanted to be a broadcaster. I think I'd like to do some writing. Everybody's got a novel in them, and I'm sure if I search hard enough, there's one in there somewhere. I also do a lot of teaching, and I enjoy teaching, so it's possible that is teaching journalism to university students. It's possible that I might do more of that. But to be honest with you, I really can't imagine doing anything other than what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. And do you write what you read on the radio, or does someone else read it and then you... write it and then you read it?
It depends a little bit on what it is. Most of the news is written by other people, and it's a pity that a lot of them are sort of unsung heroes. They are very, very good at what they do, and their names never get known by the public. But I read a lot of their work. That's for doing the news bulletins. When I'm doing what we call continuity, which is introducing programmes and doing trails and linking bits and pieces together and so on, most of that is written by me because it has to be written to an exact time, and I will know exactly how many seconds I've got before the pips, and I will write something that fits that hole. So it's a bit of both. I could be writing the news. I've worked as a journalist. I know how to do it, but there's a great deal of specialism, and you leave it to the people who are really good at it. And I read the stuff.
And what can you tell us? Your most embarrassing moment, or the most entertaining moment from being on the BBC, interviewing someone, or saying something wrong?
The most embarrassing moment, by far. Long story, but I will try and chop it down for you. I used to work for, I still do, for the BBC World Service, and they have programmes going out to different parts of the world 24 hours a day, and they have news bulletins going out to Africa. And they have a particular news bulletin, which is the African equivalent of the 6 o'clock news here. It's the big bulletin of the day. And I went into a studio carrying this bulletin, and I sat down and I read it, and I was in there on my own, and there was no, because of the way this bulletin was done, there was no audio played in, so it was just my voice. It was live from beginning to end, and I yattered away about the news for I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, and I was aware next door, the other side of the glass, that the people next door didn't look entirely happy. I couldn't stop, because obviously I was talking to Africa. And at the end of it, I came out, and the red light went off, and they said, "Can we just have a quick look at your script?" And I handed the script over, and they said, "Yeah, thought so. That's yesterday's 6 o'clock news." And it was just awful.
Oh.
I've on one other occasion, I've actually physically missed being in a studio that was supposed to be doing the bulletin. Again, the World Service, it works in a rather complicated way, and a lot of the announcers, particularly in those days, we used to have to run around the building making sure that we were in front of the right microphone when it's switched on, and it's all automated. And so I had simply misread the timetable, and somewhere in the bowels of what used to be Bush House in the Strand, a little red light came on and the microphone went live, and no one was sitting around to it, and that no one should have been me. So I think we broadcast 5 minutes of silence to somewhere or other.
And then did you just record it afterwards? Then?
No. I mean, because it's all live.
Oh yeah. What happened? Just never say it.
I think I'd gone home. I think I thought my shift was over. So they just got silence for 5 minutes. Eventually, somebody the following day said, "Where were you?" And I thought, "Oh Lord, I'm never going to work here again." But no, that was another embarrassment. You'll notice I'm concentrating on the embarrassing moments because I can't remember very many of the great moments. But when it goes wrong, it usually goes badly wrong.
Yeah, and you can always remember it.
Yes, I'm afraid so. It becomes engraved on your brain.
Exactly. And have you met anyone famous or interviewed anyone famous on the BBC?
I have a terrible memory for this sort of thing. And this is not arrogance, it really is that I have a terrible memory. I think, in terms of interviewing, I don't do a great deal of interviewing these days. I'm trying to think of the most famous person. I interviewed Tony Blair years ago.
Really?
I would need to sit down and really think about this. But in terms of who have I been in the studio next to, and that's a slightly different question. I haven't done the interview, but because I'm a newsreader, very often you will read a news bulletin, and in the studio with you, particularly on the Today programme on Radio 4, for example, they will be shuffling in the next guest. So you can be reading the 7 o'clock, the 8 o'clock news, and the big interview that follows that is being set up around you. So you're trying to sound really calm and so on. And you're very focused on the script, and it is not at all unusual to look up and to see that the Prime Minister's just sat down next to you.
Wow.
On one occasion this was Bush House, the BBC World Service, I was reading the news, and they never tell you what's coming. You just go in and read it, and you don't know what's coming. And I think it was the President of France or someone like that. But the funny thing was that I was sitting there, and I looked at this bloke, and I thought, I know you. You are. Finally, yes, you're the President of France, aren't you? But again, it sounds slightly arrogant, but you get used to this because, again, working at Broadcasting House, which is this big sort of broadcasting palace that they've now got at Oxford Circus, where all the television people are in there as well. There are household name presenters who sit just a couple of desks away from me. So, it's not. Yeah. It doesn't have quite the same cachet that you might think
exactly,
it does. When Hugh Edwards is eating a sandwich in front of you, it's not quite the same. So there are famous people in and out all the time. And in a sense, they don't know me, and I don't acknowledge them. It just becomes we're all in there doing the same jobs.
And between each newsread, or I think 6 o'clock is that? Does that mean between each? What do you do during the rest of the time?
It depends a little bit on what time of the day it is. When you are coming up to the 6 o'clock on Radio 4, the 6 o'clock news is half an hour long. It's the big bulletin of the day, really. I mean, you've got the 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, but they're only 10 minutes. It's the big radio news programme of the day, and you are expected, as the presenter of it, to get it right. Which means that you are reading the scripts as they're being written, you're making sure you understand the story, you're particularly checking on how you pronounce people's names. And it's one of those things where if you don't know what you're talking about, you'd think that if somebody gives you a script and just says, read this, it's relatively straightforward. But if you don't actually understand what you're talking about, it's very difficult to get it over to the listener. So for a big one like that, you're preparing and you work quite hard at it. For certain points of the day where, for example, the 10 o'clock news in the morning is 2 minutes long, the 11 o'clock news is 2 minutes long, it doesn't take an hour to prepare a 2-minute news bulletin. There are other things that one can be doing. You're not sitting there completely idle, but the sort of thing that you are doing might be connected with another bit of Radio 4's output altogether, rather than preparing that 2 minutes. And then, having said that, of course, if you get that 2 minutes wrong, then you'll ask why you've not got it right.
And so do you have to go, and you must have to read it and make sure that you get people's names and places right?
Yes. I mean, you become accustomed to certain names because they're in the news over and over again, and that's fine. The names that you panic about are the random ones that come up without warning, often in the middle of the night when the BBC has a pronunciation unit who will say, they will research names and they'll say, it's pronounced like this, and then you can practice. But the pronunciation unit is not there all the time.
Oh, right.
So if at 3 o'clock in the morning there's a Polish cabinet reshuffle, it's the thing that nightmares are made of. And occasionally, at certain points in the day, we will simply say, look, we'll take an educated guess at this, and until somebody tells us we're wrong, that's what we'll go with. We try to be consistently wrong, but some names are more difficult than others. Now that we've got YouTube is a brilliant resource because very often, except with people who unfortunately been murdered or unexpectedly, just members of the public who've been caught up. But with it doesn't really matter how obscure a politician is. Usually, you will find some trace of them in video or audio online, and very often you'll find somebody pronouncing their name.
Okay, So what is your connection to Southgate? How did you come to live here, or or have you been here all your life?
No, my connection to Southgate is through my wife, who was brought up here as a child, and in fact was brought up in a house just a couple of roads away from where we are now. We lived together in Bounds Green when we were first married. Oh, yes, of course you do. Yes, just round the corner. In fact, I used to live in what was it called? Can't remember the name of my road. You see, my memory is going. But very close to you, just near the tube station. And then we moved from there out to Southgate, and that's why we're here. There's no particular reason except that it's a nice area, and the children are they've been to school here and so on and so forth. So,
and finally, what will you do in the future? Will you continue to broadcast? Will you change, or do you just not know? And it's fine if you don't know. Because
I don't think any of us knows. If the BBC turns around tomorrow and says, thank you, off you go, that's it. I will continue to broadcast. I can't imagine not doing some form of broadcasting. perhaps I will get on and actually write that novel once I think of a plot idea. But I'm as you started by saying, I'm a freelance voiceover, and I will do a bit like a taxi driver. You tell me what you want me to say and how long you want me to say it for, and I'll do it. So that's what I do.
Okay, well, thank you, Charles Carroll, for being interviewed.
It's been a great pleasure.
And that concludes this interview.